Hello, welcome to Shad Life. As you can see, I have the Haro Saguaro here. One of the things on my last ride that I noticed is the front end is kind of harsh. Like it doesn't have that soft kind of compliance near the top of the suspension travel. So when I'm going over bumps, it's like shaking into my arms. One of the reasons for that is because in order to get the proper sag numbers, I also notice I'm all bottoming completely out, hitting all the way to the top. And being that the last trail I was on doesn't have anything that big, right? It shouldn't be doing that. So the solution is volume spacer. So let me talk a little bit about this for a second. This is a fairly basic fork. It's a good fork, the Marzocchi Bomber Z2, but it doesn't have a lot of these fine tuning adjustments. It doesn't have high speed and low speed compression and all of that, right? It does have this rail adjustment, so as I dial it up, it firms up the suspension and then I can completely lock it out, which is kind of surprising for a fork like this. But what happens though is if I firm this up, then it's even harsher in my arm. So what volume spacers allow me to do is it allows me to, when I set my sag, it allows the fork to be softer, but it'll ramp up faster. So like if I hit jumps and things like that, since there's more volume inside the fork taken up, it will get firmer faster, if that makes any sense, because there's less volume to work with in the fork. But what it does allow you to do is have it be a little bit softer, so off the top, those little chattery bumps, the fork is more compliant and nicer. So I'm gonna see, first of all, I have no idea how many volume spacers are in this fork, if any, from the factory. Sometimes they come with some. If there's none in there, I'm just gonna throw the 3 that I have, because this is all I have, in there to see if it makes much of a difference. And I believe it will, because I have done this before and it makes a pretty big difference. So yeah, and hopefully it prevents me from bottoming out easily, all while having that soft compliance. So if you ever wonder why people talk about volume spacers, this is why. So I'm going to go ahead and put those in and I'll show you how to do it for this particular fork anyway, but most forks are similar. So let's do it. Okay, by far the most important step, and when I say most important, I say absolutely essential. Don't forget this step or disaster will happen. Absolute most important step, let all the air out. Super important to do that. Wow. Like, if you don't do that step and you start undoing this and the air starts to come out, what will likely happen is this, this is just aluminum, this big kind of nut system or cap here. And when there is enough, like not enough remaining threads, it'll just pop off of there and it'll destroy the threads, maybe the fork threads, maybe the threads of this cap here. But you absolutely want to let the air out. Most important. Okay, let's take this off, and you want to double check a couple times. Like, okay, all the air is out of there. You saw the fork come up. Honestly, you could take the front wheel off, but you don't really have to in this case. So yeah, let's remove that. Okay, so I have the right size socket here. All forks are different. You want to just get that socket on there nice and solid. You really don't want to strip this piece out because that will not be ideal. And I thought this was the right size. Oh, well, maybe this isn't the right size. Let me check it. 25.4. Yeah? Might not be the right size. Let me check. This is absolutely not the tool you want to use for this. But it's all I got. I could not find the socket that fits this, and I don't want to strip this out. So if you do go the hack job, like using a tool like this, one of the things you want to do is make sure this is all the way down on there. Make sure this is tight, and I actually hold my finger on it. Make sure it's solidly on there because it's so easy to strip out. And then the other thing is this end will gouge into the fork there. So I only want to turn it a little bit. Yeah, it's really hard to do, but I'm like always careful. See, now I turned it, but this end wants to gouge into the fork. So I'm going to remove the wrench and do another turn. And go back again. And the reason I'm doing this back and forth is because I don't want to mar up the fork right there, which is super easy to do. And you can see that there's little marks on the edges of this from when I tried to use that socket. So that's really easy to, you may be able to make things function correctly, and you may be able to change volume spacers, but you also don't want your stuff to look like crap either. So I'm being really careful not to like smack the wrench or crank the wrench into this part of the fork so it doesn't like have a big hack mark there, right? And you can see the little edges of this. That's because that socket didn't quite fit on there like I thought it was. So be careful. I'll look up the size of what's supposed to be on here. But I just thought that Park Tool one would work. So now I took this off, and you can see it's got all the valve, everything is in there, right? And we have an opening. So I'll show you what the inside of that looks like. Oh, and we now officially know there's no volume spacers in here. So that is the problem. And you can see this little part at the top. That's what the volume spacers will lock onto, and I'll show you that in a second. So here's what it looks like inside. Trying to get this light, but it's just basically an empty, hollow chamber. See if I can get it to focus more on the bottom. Well, it's just a bunch of lube down there at the bottom. So yeah, that's what it looks like inside, and that's what the air goes into. Yeah, now you can see the lube at the bottom, and I got it to focus correctly. Cool. So that's what it looks like inside there. So adding volume spacers, it's super simple. The first time I did this, I didn't realize that this clicked on, and the whole reason why you want it to click on is because you want to, when you take this off, you want the volume spacers to come out with you. First time I did it, I just went ploop and plopped them in there. It does the job, but then getting the volume spacers out is nearly impossible. And that was a few years ago. So, but here we go. We want to click this on, and it snaps on there. So it's all one contained unit, and you can take these off one by one. I think you just got to squeeze. I haven't really, or maybe, yeah, they just pop off. Kind of like Legos, a little bit of pressure, and they come off, and you can go, 1, 2, or 3. And you could go like as many volume spacers as you want to take up the space, but you don't want to go too many because then you kind of lose the amount of, the fork ramps up too quickly, right? So we're going to try 3. I think 3 will make a big difference. It's all I have anyway. So they just go in there like that. They're locked onto this thing. And then we want to thread this back on. So got to go get the wrench that I would prefer not to have to use for this and thread this back on. As I'm doing this, I'm annoyingly doing small turns, just little tiny turns, making sure that's tight, so it's kind of time consuming. But the reason I'm doing it this way is I just do not want to mar up my fork. And it's super easy to hit here, and I mentioned that when I was taking this off, and put a mark on the fork, and then it looks like crap. You don't want it to do that. So little turns there. Now I got it snug. And then you don't need to just crank super heavily on here. You just get it kind of snug. That's all you need. I'm sure there's a torque spec, but obviously if I can't use my torque wrench to do it, I can't get it on there. But I've done this before and I've just gotten it snug and it's never been an issue. The air does not escape out of there because there's tons of threads, and I believe there's like a little kind of O-ring or something in there. So there you have it. Now I just need to put air back in the fork. Okay, so you want to use a shock pump, and yes, a shock pump. You can't do this with a regular bike pump. There's way too much pressure. Like, you know, shocks, you can go up to like 200, 250 PSI. Like this thing goes up to 400 PSI. Of course, I've never had a shock that I've had to fill that high. But you can't do this with a regular bike pump. So don't even try. So here we go. Shock pump. And then I just put the air in there. You will notice that the fork will go down again as pressure goes in there. I gotta make sure not hit the red button. That's the one thing about this particular shock pump. This is the release valve, so if you need to let air out, yeah, see the fork's already gone down. And I initially will go about 100 and something, 110, and I'll just pump this up. And then I have to take the bike off the stand and check sag. And we'll do that here in a minute. Okay, so I'm gonna get on the bike and check sag right now. I didn't put the cap back on after pumping the air in because I might have to add or take out some air. So I'm gonna get on the bike, and yes, I have my house slippers on, but it doesn't really matter. So I'm gonna get on the bike and stand up, and what I really want to do first is I want to press down and cycle the fork. The reason you want to do that is you want to get the negative and positive air chamber balanced out. And I feel like it might be a bit too stiff already. So I think that I got a pump in the way. I think that I need to let a little bit of air out because it feels way too stiff right now. Okay, I forgot to mention this bit earlier in the video, but there is a little chart on here to tell you how much air pressure. Notice it says max 120. So I knew not to go above that number when I put initial air in. I put like 110, 115, something like that. You do not want to over fill your shock or you can damage it. But if you look over here to the left, oh, that must be my GoPro timing out. If you can go over here to the left, it says 180 to 210. That's my range. And then it gives you a pressure range. So I'm going to try right around 90 and see how that feels. And then I'll adjust from there. This also talks about rebound. So if you're interested in what you want to start with rebound, I generally put more rebound in than what they recommend because I like to jump a lot and I like the front end to pop. But yeah, this is a pretty good guide to start with if you're putting air in your fork. So yeah, let's get back on the bike. Cycle. Yeah, now that feels a little soft. And this is why I have this bike stand, so it allows me to my balance is all over the place. But there, now that I have cycled the fork, let's check sag. So before I do sag, I push that little O-ring down to the bottom, and then I stand up on it, kind of attack-ish position, right? You want to carefully get off the bike, and then you want to measure sag. So there we go. That's how much sag. This looks more like what I would consider 25%. So we'll just run with it because it feels pretty good, and I'll just bring my shock pump and adjust while I'm on the trail. But hopefully this putting those volume spacers in will let me run the fork a little softer without it bottoming out, right? And then I can have that little bit of compliance when going over small bumps. Small bump compliance is usually what they call it. So yeah, that's basically how you set up a fork. And the last step is to put the cap back on. Make sure you don't forget to do that. There you go. So one thing I'm thinking about when I'm doing this is I like how unprofessional my videos are. Like I'll watch like park tool videos and some other videos, and they're so like clean and perfectly edited and everything. One of the things I like about my video, and this is kind of one of the things that I have talked about with my channel, is I just do things fairly raw, and the nice thing about that is it's more likely what you're going to personally have to deal with. You know, first thing is I didn't have the right size socket for this, right? And I have a backup plan with the wrench, but not ideal. It worked, but I wanted to make sure I didn't hack up the fork, mar it, anything like that, which is really easy to do. And you got this BFW, as we like to call it. I'll let you figure out what that means. And you're trying to loosen and tighten it, and if you're not careful, you can slip and strip out the nut and all kinds of bad stuff. So that's life, right? And I've always said this about my channel. I will always be as realistic as possible. Also, me getting on the bike and hopping up and down on it to balance out the shock, stuff like that, right? I mean, ideally, I should just take it outside and ride it and do that because it's more stable than here in the bike stand. But, you know, it is what it is. But there you have it. That is adding volume spacers to a fork and, you know, setting up the fork and putting air pressure in it and getting it dialed. And again, I'll bring this shock pump with me in my pack on the trail. And if it's too harsh, I'll let a little air out. If it's bottoming out too easily, I'll add a little air, things like that, right? Like do those fine-tune adjustments. I'll play with rebound and things like that. But I've done volume spacers before, and they make a big difference. And I think they will make a big difference in this fork. And if 3 doesn't accomplish what I want, I'll go order a couple more and add them in there. Volume spacers, you definitely need to get the right brand for the fork that you have. They're not cross-compatible with different brand forks. Marzocchi and Fox use the same volume spacer, so the ones that are in there are actually Fox volume spacers. I believe 34. I think these are 34 stanchions. They're either 34 or 35. They're definitely not 36. But yeah, they're interchangeable between Fox and Marzocchi, but you couldn't put these in like RockShox, for example, or RockShox volume spacers in Fox, and so on, right? My DVO forks, I got some up there. They also have volume spacers that are specific to DVO forks. So there you have it. Can't wait to ride and see how much of a difference that makes. Cool. Appreciate your support for my channel. Please like and subscribe. Peace.